Today we are wrapping up my reading for December 2022, which is the last reading update for 2022. Yeah, this was kind of an up and down month. When I'm looking at the stats, it's better than it felt like it was. I had some big hits, but there was a lot of things that felt very mid. I feel like I've been doing a lot of reading, some of which though I can't tell you guys about yet, so maybe that's throwing me off. I don't know. It feels like kind of a weird month. Also, I guess with all the lists, etc., it's just a little off. So anyway, we're gonna start the way we always start with my stats and challenges, and then we will talk about my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits. I should note that I have two books that I would like to talk to you guys about, but I cannot because the HarperCollins strike is still happening. So The Keeper of Night by Kylie Lee Baker was a disappointment. Give this 2.5 stars. And Blood of Dragons by Robin Hobb was a big hit. I gave it 4.5 stars. And I cannot talk about either of these, so FYI there. HarperCollins. Let's get it together here. Throwing off my mojo, forcing me to look so much more into who owns which imprints, which is just more knowledge than I wanted, to be honest. Okay, so in December, I read or DNF'd 21 books that I'm counting that I got far enough into to even make the DNF list. I owned 15 of those. I did not own 6 of them. I paid cash for 48% of them, and on average I paid $6.17 for the ones that I bought and had to pay money for instead of getting them for free. I read a total of 6,435 pages, and my average book length was 306 pages, let's say. The average age of book I read was 13 years, and the average amount of time a book had been on my TBR was 1 year. In terms of genre, it looks like my two biggest ones were fantasy and speculative romance, which feels right, followed by mystery and sci-fi. That also feels right. Oh, especially because I decided to classify the Innkeeper's Chronicles, which I'll talk more about. I decided to call those sci-fi because while there is a romantic element, they definitely read like cozy sci-fi in my opinion. So I'm just calling those sci-fi. I'm calling it sci-fi with romance as opposed to romance with sci-fi. So that is what we did in terms of genre. And then my average rating was 3.42. And distribution-wise, peaking at 3.5 stars. So I had a lot, I guess maybe that's what it was. I had a lot of books that were 3, 3.5, and 4. So it was like some things that were really good and some things that were pretty good, but I don't know. It ended up just feeling kind of mid all around. But anyway, we'll talk more about that when we get to specific books. Challenge-wise, I don't think I need to talk about any specific books that are not going to show up in a different category. Oh, the only book that I just realized I'm not going to mention in another section is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix is an ARC I read that comes out in January. And I would say this is probably like my third favorite from Grady Hendrix. I gave this 4 stars. I think that this is really a very timely book. It's a lot about grief. So basically it's these two siblings whose parents die unexpectedly and under circumstances that become odder as things go on. Their parents die unexpectedly and they leave them this house, which is the titular haunted house. And they have a really acrimonious relationship and a really difficult dynamic between them. They're both very flawed people. And they're coming together because both of them really need the money out of this house. So I think that this is a book that's very timely post-pandemic, thinking about grief. And it seems to me that that's kind of like metaphorically a lot of what this book is about grief and generational trauma and processing the death of the older generation and like what you lose with that and how your siblings and your relationship to your siblings changes as you lose your parents. So I think it's very timely in that respect. And I think I continue to really like the way that Grady Hendrix does metaphor in his horror. It's not that it's super subtextual, it's pretty on the nose, but I think that it tends to be things that I'm interested in, the on the noseness of it. And he always has what I describe as like a fun element or a very over the top campiness to his horror, which for me really works. I will say that this one I think is probably the least campy of his horror. And that was probably why I didn't love it the way that I've loved other things from him in the past. But I really thought this was effective and a good haunted house story, and it had things to think about and interesting dynamics. And if you don't like creepy dolls, this definitely is replete with creepy dolls. So overall, not my favorite from him, but still very strong. And I think a really a timely book, a book of our current moment, if you will. I will start with my disappointments and we'll work our way up. Okay, first of all, I put a little sticky note here to remind myself to tell you about one particular disappointment, which was Zodiac Academy. I thought that this would be a really fun vlog to watch me suffer or to watch me just like love it. And so I started on it and I ended up posting it as bonus content for my patrons and channel members because it made me laugh, this vlog, because like when you watch the beginning of it, I am so hopeful and then it crashed and burned so quickly. I could not even get out of the first book. So I was expecting that to be some like kind of trashy fun reading, like interwoven into the rest of my plans for the month kind of a thing. And it was a fail so quickly. So that was a notable DNF. A disappointment, but also not, because that little clip really made me laugh watching the total, like me reading the synopsis and being like, oh, this is actually pretty good, and then watching where it went. So that is a disappointment. Another disappointment that I mentioned in my mid-month check-in and said I would talk more about at the end of the month was Bright and Deadly Things by Lexi Elliott. So this is a mystery thriller, sure, that is coming out, I believe, in either January or February. So it should be coming out soon. And the reason I put this as a disappointment is because I think that there's a lot of good stuff in it, but it just didn't really come together as strongly as I would have wanted. I felt like the pacing was really off, and it didn't really end up being the isolated close circle mystery I thought it was going to be, which disappointed me because I just thought it was going to be a kind of book that it didn't end up being. I think it's just too long is kind of the bottom line. I think if this had been shorter, this would have had a lot more impact to it because the writing itself was really good, and I think ultimately the book it ended up being was a good story and well done, except for that it was too long, so that I felt like really dissipated a lot of the impact. But if you're interested in the synopsis, which is basically a bunch of Oxford professors and students are going to this retreat that the university owns in the Alps, and it's like no technology, and there's kind of like a potential speculative element, someone dies, like what's going on. That's kind of the setup, and I think it was entertaining enough. I just think it was disappointing for me because I was hoping it was going to be an isolated close circle mystery, and it didn't really end up being that. At least it didn't have the plot beats I would expect from that trope, typically. I would say also the Christmas murder game was so disappointing. I was really hopeful that this was going to be a fun Christmas mystery. I read this during the week of Christmas. I have like a cozy end of the year vlog that'll come out sometime in the next couple of weeks where you'll see me reading this in detail. But yeah, basically TLDR is just that this was really flat. I think that this would have worked really well as a TV movie or like a Christmas special kind of thing, but I think as a book, the characters are all so two-dimensional. All of it feels really dull. Like the things that are happening shouldn't be dull, but it feels dull. And then there's a game within a game kind of a thing, which they tell you about on these pages. And like the first one literally doesn't come until a third of the way through the book. Right? Yeah, like neither of the things that happen come until page 97 or 99 of a less than 300 page book. It's like, if you're gonna have a game within a game, give it to me earlier so that I can enjoy that it's happening. And by the time it started happening, I just didn't even care anymore. So I don't know. This wasn't like the worst thing ever. I wouldn't like tell you not to read it, but I guess I just didn't really vibe with it. And I think there's potential here. Like, I would love to see this adapted. I think this could be a really cool adaptation. But as a book, I just didn't feel like it was all that well executed, unfortunately. And then the other disappointment, and this is disappointing, that I wanted to tell you guys about is Blitz by Daniel O'Malley. Look, guys, The Rook is one of my all-time favorite books, easily a top 20 book for me. I love that book, and I will continue to check out new entries in the Cheque Files series for as long as he's publishing them. Like, I'll keep checking it out. This wasn't bad. It was just way too long, and it's two different storylines, which you guys know I'm always a little bit of a hard sell on the dual timeline thing. And this is an interesting example of why I think it's really hard to pull that off well. That's because in this case, it's not that I think one storyline is more interesting than the other, or that I was like waiting to get back to the other. It's that having them together, I think, really throws off the pacing of this and makes both of them less impactful. I think one of them is set in the 40s, one of them is contemporary. It's in the has the titular Blitz happening in the 1940s timeline. And I think it's trying to say some things. I don't know that it says them as well. I don't know. I wonder if he's trying to take on the whole critique of the Harry Potter universe, which is like, if there were wizards around during World War II in this world, why did they not stop the Nazis? And I wonder if this is what he was trying to do, like kind of trying to play with that idea. But anytime you bring up the Nazis, you just gotta, it's gotta be earned. And I don't know that it was earned in this case, and the way it ends, while I think is an interesting thing to posit, I just don't know that it earned it. So I don't know. I think my suggestion for this to have made this better would have been to separate these into two shorter books and publish them like in the same year kind of a thing, because you keep waiting for them to sort of come together, and they do-ish, but I don't think enough that it really merits them being together in the same book. So that would have been my suggestion, is like have it be, you know, the 1940 book comes out, and then and you could even re-edit it if you wanted to and have maybe a flashback or two in the present day one, and have that be the second book that came out in a year, and make it books 3 and 4 versus book 3. So all that to say, I don't think this is terrible. It was like reasonably entertaining. That's why, I mean, it's a 3-star, but for something this long and from an author who has delivered to me in the past one of my all-time favorite books, this was probably my biggest disappointment overall. Okay, and then moving into surprises. So first of all, Cain's Jawbone. You will also be seeing a vlog of this. This is I mean, you'll see I've torn it up, so I really just have the husk of it left. This is a mystery book from 1934 that is also a literary puzzle. And so you're trying to figure out the 6 people who died and who killed them, and the ordering of the pages. This is such a fascinating experiment of stream of consciousness. So like, aside from the puzzle aspect of it, which you'll see in the vlog, this is a effing hard puzzle to solve. Aside from the puzzle aspect of it, just as a book reading through it, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this as a stream of consciousness novel from this era. So like, even aside from trying to solve the puzzle, I found this just enjoyable as a stream of consciousness literary novel. And that surprised me. So definitely recommend this if you're interested in having a project. It is so hard. It is not, I mean, only 4 people have ever solved this so far. There are subreddits dedicated to it, I discovered. There's like it's a whole thing. It's way harder than S, which I also failed at fully understanding, but this is definitely harder. Some of it is because it's in a different country. So like, there's some references that I'm like, I wonder if I was British, I would have picked that up. The other thing is that it's just it's almost 100 years old now. So some of the like references that might have been more readily apparent at the time are definitely very oblique now. So this was a whole thing, but I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this as a book, I guess, is the takeaway here. Another surprise I wanted to mention was The Drift by C.J. Tudor. The reason I wanted to put this as a surprise was that I wasn't expecting this to not really be a mystery. It's actually more, I would describe this as dystopian sci-fi thriller, probably would be the genre. So that just surprised me. That was not genre-wise what I was anticipating when I picked it up. It's definitely my favorite thing from C.J. Tudor I have picked up so far. I think it's a fun book. That's probably how I would describe it. So I could see people who want more surprises or who are really big dystopian thriller readers. I don't know that this is like breaking new ground, but I think that this is really entertaining and fun. So for that reason, I gave it a 4-star, because I just had a good time reading it. It was, highly entertaining to me. It's also very cold and snowy, so if you're looking for something that's very seasonally appropriate for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere and are looking for a snowy book, I think this feels very wintry. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I ended up really liking it for what it was. It just wasn't what I thought it was. The third book I wanted to mention as a surprise was Sweep of the Heart by Alona Andrews, which I ended up giving 3.5 stars. And I've got an entire podcast going on right now for this Innkeeper Chronicles series, and I have really conflicted feelings about this book, and I guess that is why I wanted to put it as a surprise. It's just so, the last few entries have been so difficult for me to rate or quantify my feelings, because if I were thinking of them as standalones or as not Alona Andrews books, they would get higher ratings for me. Like, I would probably give them all 4 to 4.5 stars. But because they're in a series and because they are from Alona Andrews, they're not quite giving me what I want from the series, and they're not quite as good as Alona Andrews can be. So I just feel really conflicted about these books. Sweep of the Heart, I would not start with. I will say, I was so excited that we finally got some macro plot payoff. So for those of you, a couple of people have asked me about this, does Sweep of the Heart finally move the macro plot forward? Yes, we finally get some momentum after 3 books. At the very end, we finally get some momentum of moving the series plot forward. So that was very welcome. But overall, I just have mixed feelings about this book. So go check out the podcast if you want the full details. And then the last book I wanted to mention as a surprise was Senta by Honey Phillips, because I was surprised at how moved I was by this sci-fi Christmas romance featuring an alien whose survival form is him as a Bigfoot. He literally he becomes a gigantic Yeti Bigfoot thing, which is so campy and fun. And I love it. But then I don't know if I was just hormonal or what, but I was genuinely moved by the end of this book about them being, about the trials that they're going through. So basically it's sort of like a snowed in kind of trope. And our heroine has gone up to this cabin she inherited from her uncle, and she gets snowed in there for Christmas. And this Bigfoot alien is an anthropologist from this other alien species who is inspecting Earth and making field notes on us. So he's supposed to keep his distance, but he can't. So I was surprisingly moved by this, which is why I put it as a surprise, was that it made me cry. So there you go. Okay, and then we have 3 hits, one of which I can't talk to you about, so I can't talk to you about Rainwild Chronicles, even though I'd really like to. So let's start with the book I don't have in physical form, which is Bed of Roses by Nora Roberts. This was my last read of 2022. It also made me cry again. I don't know if I was just hormonal or what, but this is the book it's really probably more of a 4-star, but I think where I was in the moment with it, it has to be a 4.5 star, because this is the book that reminds me I can like a full-length contemporary romance novel if they're well done and if they merit being a full book. And this did. This has so much competency porn, which is Nora Roberts' thing. So basically, if you don't know the Bridal Quartet series from her, it's these 4 lifelong friends who own this wedding business together. They have this beautiful estate that one of them inherited when her parents died, and one of them is a photographer, one of them is a florist, one of them is a pastry chef, and the other one owns the estate and is like a wedding planner basically for the estate. And so they each get their own book. The first one was about the photographer. This one is about the florist, hence Bed of Roses. And it's a friends to lovers story, which when well done is one of my favorite tropes. It's very hard to do that trope well, but this one was good. And part of what I loved about this was that our main character, Emma, is just like a lovely, happy person. And you want good things for her. I mean, you want good things for all of them, but she's just like a lovely person who is very beautiful and very charismatic. So she's had her pick of people throughout her life, and she will not settle for anything less than full-on love romance because that's what her parents had. And I just thought that it was a lovely story about two people coming together. I love seeing all the wedding business stuff. I always love that in a Nora Roberts contemporary, seeing like the job aspects of people's lives. She writes that really well. I love the friendship dynamic between the four of them. It's not that a ton happens in this book, but she paces it well and has the right character development, and again, she just does that competency porn thing so well that it sustains a full novel. And it just made me cry and happy and just excited that I am not dead inside to contemporary romance. I am not. It just takes a book that works for me. And this kind of Nora Roberts contemporary just works for me. They don't always, but this series is really hitting the spot. So, because it reminded me I'm not a Grinch with a cold dead heart, this got 4.5 stars. The other thing that got 4.5 stars because it was just a delight and so cozy and officially put T. Kingfisher into a new favorite author category for me is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. This is YA that has no romance in it, which I think is hard to find. And it's YA, I guess, because of the age of the protagonist and the kind of conflict, but it just reads kind of just like general fantasy, I think. It's funny. We have basically the setup for this is that there's a serial killer who is trying to kill all of the wizards in the city. Our main character is a wizard who has very minor magic, and she basically can work her magic on baked goods. She has a sentient sourdough starter named Bob, who, I mean, he is a star in this show. She basically has been very overlooked for her magic in general because it's not like important magic, but slowly the serial killer is killing off wizards, and it is because they're trying to leave the city defenseless so that there can be like this political thing. That's kind of like what the plot is. So her people call upon her to try to figure out how to use her magic to defend their city. And the way that that happens is amazing. Like, I love these scenes. They're so over the top, but they have a lot of pathos to them. I cried at the end of this because ultimately I think thematically this is about like how politics are this machine that just churns, and even the people who seem to be in charge can't really do a lot to change the way that the machine is churning. And the grist for the mill of that machine are normal people, and how, I mean, like, this is a lot about how we abuse people. I mean, at least for me as an American, and I believe, yeah, T. Kingfisher, I think, lives in North Carolina. Like, we as Americans, like, abuse our veterans. Like, we're so militaristic, and then we do not take care of the people that we send to fight in these pointless wars that we have. So, like, I feel like this is about PTSD and what war does to people. Molly! God, it killed me. So, like, it's a lot. I think thematically this has a lot to say for being a story about a girl figuring out how to use her new little gingerbread man friend to protect her city. And it was so good. I just love T. Kingfisher. I love her imagination. Her writing style is so wonderful. It's funny, and yet always it has like this real heart to it and this real poignancy that just works for me. I don't know, man. I just love her. This was so good. I can't wait to read more. I'm slowly just like stockpiling the T. Kingfisher random titles people recommend to me. I'm like, okay, that one's good. Great. And she's written so much. So there's so much to dive into. It's wonderful. That was my December 2022 reading wrap up, the last reading wrap up of 22. I hope that you had a wonderful reading year. I hope you've been enjoying all of my end of the year wrap up stuff. It's my favorite stuff to do. This coming weekend, you will get, you're going to be getting more like beginning of the year kind of thing. So I think this weekend is the last wrap up for 2022. It's like my superlatives and my stats. So that's this weekend. And then we'll start getting into 2023 reading and general plans. So stay tuned for that. And we're also slowly getting just back into my normal content that's not based around the beginning and ending of a year, which, you know, whatever. I love this time of year, so I'm always sad when it's over. So anyway, let me know how you wrapped up your reading year. Happy 2023 to you all. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!